Take a person from a small indigenous community deep in the Brazilian Amazon and a person from a tiny island in the Bay of Bengal on the far side of the planet, and read their DNA side by side. By every map we have of human history, they should be near strangers, separated by oceans, by continents, by tens of thousands of years. Instead, buried in the Amazonian genome is a signal that ties Lindyp closely than the Amazonian is tied to many other Native Americans. Geneticists at Harvard Medical School first caught it in 2015 in a study published in the journal Nature, and a decade later, they still cannot fully explain it. It should not be there. There is no migration, no route, no chapter in the accepted story of how people reached the Americas that puts a thread of Australian and Andaman Islander ancestry into the rainforest of Brazil. And yet the signal is real, it is reproducible, and after years of work by some of the best ancient DNA labs on Earth, it has refused to resolve. The researchers gave it a name. They called it Population Y, and it is one of the strangest things hidden in any human genome. The first Americans were never who we thought they were. This is not speculation. This is genomics. To understand why this signal is so disturbing, you have to understand the story it interrupts. A story that, until recently, felt almost finished. For most of the last century, the peopling of the Americas was told as a single clean event. At the end of the last ice age, as sea levels dropped, a land bridge emerged between Siberia and Alaska, a vast cold plain called Beringia. A population of hunter-gatherers originally derived from East Asians moved into that land and paused there, isolated for thousands of years, while the great ice sheets blocked the way south. Then, as the ice retreated, they poured down through the continent, spreading from Alaska to the southern tip of Chile in what may have been only a few thousand years. The genetics seemed to confirm it beautifully. Ancient DNA showed that this founding population split from East Asians around 36,000 years ago. That contact between them continued until roughly 25,000 years ago. And that once in the Americas, the group divided into a northern and a southern branch, sometime between about 17,500 and 14,600 years ago. One source, one entry point, one swift expansion, a clean tree with clean branches. Everyone in the hemisphere descended from that single founding stock, and the whole story could be drawn as one line moving south. The model was elegant, well-evidenced, and widely accepted. And then a team looked closely at the genomes of a few Amazonian groups, and the clean tree grew a branch that pointed somewhere impossible. The team was led by Pontus Skoglund and David Reich at Harvard Medical School, and their 2015 paper in Nature examined genome-wide data from around 30 Native American groups. They were not hunting for anomalies. They were filling in the details of that clean migration story. What they found in the Amazon stopped them. 3 groups in particular, the Tupi-speaking Surui and Curitiana and the Gay-speaking Zavante, carried a component of ancestry that did not match the rest of Native America. When the team compared it against populations worldwide, the closest matches were not in Siberia, not in East Asia, not anywhere along the expected Beringian path. The closest relatives of that mysterious component were indigenous Australians, the people of New Guinea, and the Ong of the Andaman Islands, hunter-gatherers from an island off the coast of Southeast Asia. It was a small fraction of the total, around 2% of Amazonian ancestry. But 2% of something that should be 0 is not a rounding error, it is a contradiction. These were Australasian genetic signatures, the deep ancestry of peoples on the far side of the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, sitting inside the genomes of people in the Brazilian rainforest, and not appearing, in the same clear way, anywhere else in the Americas. The team named the hypothetical source Population Y, from Waipaquera, the word for ancestor in Tupi, the language of the Surui and Curitiana. A ghost population, named in the language of the people who carry its trace. The first instinct with a finding like this is to suspect a mistake, a contaminated sample, a statistical artifact, a quirk of one group, but the signal did not behave like an error. It held steady across multiple Amazonian populations, it survived different methods of analysis, and it carried the specific shape of ancient shared ancestry rather than recent noise. An error is random. This was structured, and the structure of it was the deepest part of the puzzle. The Australasian signal showed up in the Amazon, far to the south and deep in the interior of the continent. It did not show up, at least not in the same clear way, among the native peoples of North America, the very ground that anyone arriving from Asia would have had to cross first. The ghost was strongest at the end of the road, and nearly invisible at its beginning, which forces a hard question. How does a population leave its fingerprint at the far end of 2 continents while leaving almost nothing along the entire path it must have walked to get there? There are 3 ways to explain population Y, and none of them sits comfortably. The first, and the most conservative, keeps everything inside the Beringian model. On this reading, the founding population that crossed into the Americas was never genetically uniform. It was already structured, already carrying a faint Australasian-related component mixed in among its East Asian ancestry. As the group spread south, that component was diluted and reshuffled almost everywhere, but in a few isolated Amazonian populations, it happened to survive at levels we can still detect. No second migration is required. The ghost was always part of the crowd. It simply faded from view in most places and lingered by chance in a few. The second reading allows for more than one pulse. It proposes that a distinct group, carrying a stronger dose of Australasian ancestry, entered the Americas through Beringia as a separate wave, either earlier or later than the main founding population, and somehow pushed deep into South America while leaving little trace in the north. 2 streams of people, entering by the same northern door at different times, with only one of them carrying the ghost. The third reading is the one researchers handle most carefully, because it strains the map the hardest. It suggests that population Y reached South America by a route that bypassed the North American interior almost entirely, perhaps moving fast along a Pacific coastline whose evidence now lies underwater, a path that seeded the signal in the south without leaving it in the north. This is the version that flirts with the edge of the accepted story, and it is exactly the version the data cannot confirm. No skeleton of population Y has ever been found. There is no body, no site, no artifact, only the trace it left inside living and ancient genomes. A ghost in the most literal sense. You might expect that more data would settle this. Instead, more data made it stranger. In 2018, 2 major studies sequenced ancient genomes from across the Americas, including remains from Lagoa Santa in southeastern Brazil. One team, working with J. Victor Moreno-Mayar and S.K. Willerslev, found the Australasian signal in ancient South Americans. Another team, led by Cosimo Posth, examined ancient individuals from the same region and, in several of them, did not find it at all. The signal seemed to appear and vanish depending on which bones you read. One detail captures the whole problem. The population Y signal turned up in an early individual from a site called Lapa do Sumiduro, dated to roughly 10,400 years ago. But it was not detected in burials from Lapa do Santo, a site barely 4 kilometers away. 4 kilometers. 2 ancient communities, neighbors by any measure, one carrying the ghost and one, apparently, without it. The signal was not just old and faint, it was patchy, present in one valley and gone in the next, exactly what you would expect from an ancestry that had entered a fragmented founding population and then scattered unevenly across a continent. And population Y was not even the only ghost. The same wave of research turned up a second one, a population geneticists call UPopA, short for Unsampled Population A. It has never been seen directly in anyone. It exists only as a statistical shadow, detected indirectly in the genomes of the Mixe people of southern Mexico, who appear to carry a slice of ancestry from a deeply divergent group that left no other record. 2 ghosts now, haunting the same founding story, neither with a face. Here is where the story turns, because the natural reaction to all this is to feel that the science has failed, that a clean answer has dissolved into contradictions and ghosts and signals that flicker in and out of ancient bones. The opposite is true. The mess is the discovery. For decades, the peopling of the Americas was drawn as a single line, one people moving down one continent, because that was the simplest story the early evidence could support. Population Y and UPopA are the data refusing that simplicity. They are telling us the founding of the Americas was not one clean wave, but something layered and structured and partly invisible, a movement of peoples complex enough that, 10,000 years later, it still leaks ancestry we cannot trace to any known source. The ghosts are not a failure of the model, they are the edge of a bigger one. They mark the places where the real history was richer than the map we drew over it, where populations existed, mingled, and vanished without leaving a name, a site, or a skeleton, surviving only as a faint pressure inside the genomes of their descendants. The clean tree was never the truth. It was just the part of the truth we could see first. Imagine standing at the edge of the Amazon, where the forest meets a slow brown river at the end of the day. The air is thick and warm and loud with insects, and the green runs back farther than the eye can follow. It is about as far from the Andaman Islands from the coast of Australia as it is possible for human beings to get and still be on the same planet. And somewhere in the bodies of the people who have lived here for thousands of years runs a thread that reaches all the way back to those distant shores, carried in by ancestors who left no other mark. You cannot see it. They could not see it. For most of human history, no one knew it was there at all. It took a technology that did not exist a generation ago to read it, and even now, reading it, we cannot say how it arrived. Standing at that river, the question is no longer simply who the first Americans were. The question is how many peoples are folded into that word, and how many of them we will never be able to name. There is something worth pausing on in the name itself. When the scientists needed a word for this lost population, they did not invent a sterile label. They borrowed Waipiquera, the Tupi word for ancestor, from the very people whose genomes carry the signal. The Surui and the Karitiana did not need a sequencing machine to tell them they had ancestors who came from somewhere far away and long ago. That knowledge lives in language and story in nearly every indigenous culture on Earth. What the DNA added was not the fact of deep origins, but the strangeness of their reach. A confirmation that the ancestry of these communities extends across a distance that still defies explanation. The science arrived, as it so often does, at a door the people had been standing near all along. And this is the part that reaches past the Amazon, past the Americas entirely. We carry an instinct that the deep past of any people is a single clean line, a migration, an origin, a homeland you can point to on a map. The ghost signal is one of the clearest cases we have of how false that instinct is. Here, in the founding of an entire hemisphere, the genomes insist on plurality, on layers, on populations that came and went and left only a whisper. The first Americans were not one people who walked one road. They were many, some of whom we can name, and some of whom we may only ever know as a pressure in the data, a ghost wearing the word ancestor in a language they never spoke. The first Americans were never who we thought they were, and neither, it turns out, are any of us.